this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Hi, welcome to the End Game. This is episode 15. I'm Tom Shanahan. I'm here with my co-host Herman Bowles, retired colonel, West Point grad, the first black quarterback at his high school in Alabama when desegregation was taking place. And then our guest today, the first one needs no introduction, a civil rights pioneer, but I'll give a brief one anyways. Ernie Green, who was a member of the Little Rock Nine, that desegregated Central High School in the 1957-58 school year. Ernie is a Michigan State grad. He attended Michigan State on an anonymous scholarship that he didn't learn until President John Hanna died in 1991, was funded by President Hanna, who also was appointed in 1957 by President Dwight Eisenhower as the first chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. And then also joining us is Ernie's roommate back in 58, 59 school year at West Shaw Hall on campus, Larry Osterink. Larry's family was friends with John Hanna. Larry's father had a construction company in Grand Rapids. And John Hanna wanted Ernie's transition with a culture shock from the segregated South to a northern campus to go as smoothly as possible. And he asked Larry to be his roommate, and they've been great friends ever since then. Welcome, all three guys. First, Herman, say a couple words here.
Yeah, well, as usual, Tom, I just want to commend you for everything we've been doing, and for Larry and Ernie's perspective. If you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to some of our other episodes, it's just been phenomenal. I get personally great feedback from participating in this. And Ernie, obviously, you and I go back sometimes around our time at Executive Leadership Council. And obviously, Ernie, you're one of those individuals, and that's what's great about having the opportunity to participate in this show. You're one of those individuals that, for me, as a young Black kid growing up in Alabama, as I came of age, and I remember the first time I met you in person, and it's like those ideas of somewhat now, maybe I have that impact on young people, but you certainly had that impact on me, and I know you've had it on others. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation to get reconnected with you. And Larry, I'm just to learn the fact that you had this, I've got a secret mission for you if you care to take it, and what you did in this very, very trying time to be there with Ernie. And we're all better off the fact that he made it. I think he would have made it nonetheless, but I'm certain your tutelage and sponsorship was very important. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to talking with both of you. And Tom does a great job here. So what we're going to do is just have a conversation like we were around the campfire.
Yeah, welcome, Ernie. Why don't you introduce our friend Larry Osterink, our new friend?
Well, Larry was a student that taught me. He didn't realize it, but I always said Osterink was the only guy I knew on Saturday nights was studying. The rest of us were out trying to be Joe College and followed behind the football team. And so, Larry, one of the things that I always applauded you for was your academic excellence, your ability to stay on point. And for me, it was a learning experience. I thought I was supposed to be part Joe College and maybe look at a book every now and then. but it turned out the other way around, that I needed to be less Joe College and spend all of my time trying to hit the books. The other thing about Osterink was that he came from a Michigan State family, and it only takes a little while for you to realize that that's an important connection, that history, how you got there, what you're doing, and how what you're going to do after you leave Michigan State was something that got implanted in you. And I always thought, well, this is a big state school. You come in, you leave, and occasionally you get in touch with people. But it turns out that it really is a big state school, but you also make a relationship that lasts for a lifetime. So, Larry, you taught me more than I thought I could learn, and I appreciate that. I have one other comment, that on our floor, there were a couple of football players, and I think on the next floor, Herb Adderley and I've forgotten who else were located. They had a game of hearts that they played. It was the hottest game of hearts in America, I'm sure. But when it's time for the lights to go out and for us to hit the books, they listened to Osterink. They cut the lights out, cut the game off, and got to their primary function, which was to try to make the Michigan State relationship work for them. So, Osterink, I don't know if you knew you were having that kind of impact on football players even, but I want to applaud you for it. Whether it was direct or indirect, it turned out to be an important change.
Yeah. Go ahead, Larry.
I didn't realize any of that, Ernie, and I appreciate you vocalizing it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, today is August 28th, the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. Might be a day or two before this is edited and up on my website, tomshanahan.report, but that makes the timing very interesting. I usually connect with Ernie on some kind of important matter. Ernie was very helpful with me when I wrote Ray of Light. Jimmy Ray connected me with Ernest, and one of the things Ernie told me about Michigan State was it was and remember, Ernie was there in the late 50s and early 60s and also got a master's degree. And Ernie said that Michigan State was a real launching pad for people of color. Also recently talked to Ernie when we talked about Jerry Jones photos showing up at North Little Rock High School during this desegregation controversy. And Jerry Jones has never really given a proper explanation. He's just kind of passed it off as he was in the crowd, where he could have made stronger statements as an owner of the Dallas Cowboys, but he got a pass because of his stature. And then the more recent one, talking to him now because I have a story coming out about Gene Washington, College Football Hall of Famer, showing up in 1963 as a freshman from segregated Texas. And his roommate was a guy named Gary Dilley from a white town, Huntington, Indiana, all white town. And he ended up being an Olympic silver medalist. And these guys were randomly thrown together, as were many of the Michigan State black students, even the ones from the South, with white students, not necessarily athletes. And I got to thinking this was an example of Michigan, another example, one of many, of Michigan State being ahead of the times. Remember, the 1964 and 65 Civil Rights Acts hadn't even been signed yet. And I asked Ernie if he thought this was an example of John Hanna, Michigan State's president, and his leadership. And you certainly do, right, Ernie? Go ahead and talk about that.
Well, I think the deeper you dig, the more you find that John Hanna was really involved in details, and that the issue of race and racial identity and ethnic opportunities was something that Hanna paid a lot of attention to. When I received my scholarship after the year at Little Rock Central, I told someone I had to look at a map to find out where East Lansing, Michigan was, because it was I was unfamiliar with it. But John Hanna stuck his neck out, I think, in many ways that we just now are beginning to have some appreciation. At the time, the atmosphere, the relationship that other schools had with the issue of racial opportunity and equity, John Hanna was ahead of the crowd.
Yeah. And Herman, you can relate to that, I'm sure. When Herman got to West Point in 1974, there weren't that many black cadets. There are far more now, a better representation. Talk about that experience from your viewpoint, Herman.
Yeah, well, obviously, Ernie had a little more of a challenge than I did. However, he also had notoriety, and I'll be interested to understand from him, was that notoriety good or bad as he got on campus? But for me, coming from a small town in Alabama and being an athlete, played 4 sports in high school, there's just something, even your white colleagues, right? When you're on the gridiron or the basketball court, you're one team together, right? And you just have this idea about accomplishing a goal and a mission. And obviously that is paramount to what the military is in itself. And, I tell people that despite the fact that I went to West Point in the 70s, I cannot think of maybe one incident where I thought there was overt racism and somebody going after you. You have to understand, particularly during your pre-plebe year, everybody is hollering at you, and it's not something you can sit there and say, well, this guy's hollering at me because he's a racist or this, that. So you just have to get that out of your mind, because Ernie, I know you understand this concept. If you're always looking around the corner, seeing somebody is out to get me, you're playing defense. Yeah. And what I try to do in my life is play offense, meaning that I've got control of the situation and you can't make me do anything. I will react to you. However, I'm going to react on my terms. So I can just say collectively about the military in general and West Point in particular, there were not those issues that were noticeable to me. And perhaps it was that particularly during my plebe year, you're just accustomed to being on the bottom of the pole and that's where you're going to be. And that's our whole concept for creating leaders. Before you can become a good leader, you have to learn how to be a good follower.
Yeah. Real quickly, I'll kind of summarize on what the Little Rock Nine was about. And then Ernie, I want you to talk about it. Of course, the Brown versus Board of Education Act was in 1954, and schools in the South just ignored it. But in 1957, the NAACP in Little Rock decided to challenge it. And they had recruited 9 black students to desegregate Central High School. One of them was Ernie. Ernie was the oldest, which meant he was the first to graduate, which led to his enrollment at Michigan State just a year later. But the governor, Orville Faubus of Arkansas, resisted segregation and called out the National Guard to block their entry. And it took a while, a couple of weeks, I think it was 18 days, but eventually President Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and sent in the airborne troops that Ernie likes to associate himself with to escort the students to school and into the classrooms.
Well, one of the things that's important at that time, few people expected Eisenhower to call off use the 101st Airborne to help assist us in school. So this was breaking character for a number of people, not the least being the President of the United States.
Right. And if you could talk about what that experience was like, we kind of gloss over things in American history. Oh, Eisenhower sent in the troops, and Ernie and the others were able to go to school. It was still a rough time there. You had to be escorted by soldiers to classes, and you weren't necessarily welcomed after that.
Well, partly Little Rock was trying to get ahead of the problem. The school board had voted to desegregate the year of 1957-58. And I was one of the students that selected, both with support from my parents, because that was pretty dangerous decision to get out and challenge all of the old norms. But my mother, when I told her that I wanted to go to Central, she said, if you want to do it, I'm going to support you. And that was why, of the 9 students, I was the only one who was a senior. The others were lower classmen, juniors and sophomores. But what I thought, we knew the Supreme Court decision was going to come down at some point in time to challenge school equity. I thought that what might happen is you get this great decision, but you don't have anybody who's going to follow it. And that within the Black community, there was a lot of uncertainty about being put at risk by challenging the attitude that it was all right to desegregate these institutions. Little Rock Central was regarded as one of the best high schools in the South. And I wanted to make certain that I took advantage of the best opportunity in the South. And so I stepped forward. Many of my friends said, "Are you crazy? You know, all they're going to do is throw rocks at you. They're not going to invite you to events. You're going to give up all this for a chance to go to Central." And I said, at some point, these institutions have to be challenged. I knew that Arkansas was Razorbacks, and that we had an opportunity to challenge the state. They had admitted a few Black students to the med school, but for the most part, all these other institutions were segregated. So my attitude was that you had to have somebody who was willing to step forward. You had to be willing to take advantage, because you knew that all the facilities were not equal. And thirdly, you had to be willing to show that in the minority communities, there were people willing to challenge existing attitudes, and that I was willing to step forward. And I was surprised that so few people were willing to follow my direction. I thought that it was pretty common sense that you'd want to change and get the best that they had to offer so that you'd have a brighter future. It was all about the future.
Yeah, Herman, you touched a little bit about the respect people like Ernie had that were clearing the way. Go ahead, comment.
No doubt about it. And, when this was all going on, I was a, 2-year-old and not cognizant of anything in the world. And as we've spoken many times, Tom, and I think Ernie can attest to this as well. When you grow up as a little kid, you grow up in the environment you're in. And of course, we didn't have cable and internet and all of these things. So you had no idea. You had, 2 TV stations, and you hope the tube didn't go out on the TV. And when you wanted to watch another channel, you had to turn the antenna. Ernie probably remembers those things as well.
Absolutely.
So the point is just having role models, and Ernie, for me, kind of being at finance, and we'll get to us later, but being one of the first managing directors of a Wall Street firm. I mean, Ernie, when I graduated from Harvard Business School, you were one of my idols. I'm like, look at this guy, look at what this guy is doing. And those are just so important in terms of images that do there. And of course, we all know the images of you guys being escorted to school. And of course, very similar image when George Wallace stood on the steps at University of Alabama and said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And now look at the Alabama football team, and what would they do, and what would they be like if they had segregation now and segregation forever. So all of this change is good. And at the same time, as we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, and I'm getting ready to go to West Point tomorrow, and Ernie and Larry, I'm vice chairman of the board of our alumni association, and we're getting ready to have a diversity conference that we have every year. And I'm going to report here that my family actually just endowed that conference. So it'll be named after my family, primarily my wife, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but she was a military officer, worked at West Point, and she was responsible for over 1,000 cadets going to West Point. And Ernie, you may remember, she was a presidential appointee in the Clinton administration. So these things that we're living through, the march, and then we have what happened in Jacksonville this weekend. And it's like every time you feel that you're going forward and making progress, there's this little signal that says, you're not there yet. So it's
right. Well, I was at the march. I drove with I just gotten married. I drove with my wife from East Lansing to Washington. And this was before it had any notoriety. Anybody knew you were coming.
Yeah.
But to think that you could organize that many people around an idea was earth-shaking. I didn't think they would have more than, maybe 1,000 people there. And when we got to Washington and saw the numbers, you were just amazed. You were knocked off your socks.
Yeah, they planned for 100,000, got 250,000. So Ernie made it through the year. It was a very difficult year. It's not like he was welcomed. And at graduation, Martin Luther King attended. That's what a big moment this was in the South. And then he arrives at Michigan State. And as I mentioned earlier, John Hanna pulled Larry Osterink aside to ask him to be his roommate, help him through. And your first day on campus, Larry, this is a fascinating story. You were telling me this earlier. A national network, you don't remember which one it was, did a news report with you and Ernie about how you were going to be roommates at Michigan State. And you started getting hate mail from the South. Talk about that first day, getting to know Ernie, and then I imagine your shock of how people were still responding to it.
Yes, it certainly was, because it was a total surprise. It never occurred to me that such a thing would happen. So anyway, I agreed to John Hanna to be Ernie's roommate. And I showed up on campus the day before classes were going to start. And when I checked in, I got a note that said, be in the lounge at such and such a time, because we're going to have a news conference. And there was no forewarning of that. So I checked in and went into the lounge. I don't know that Ernie and I had even met yet. We might have, but if so, it would only have been about an hour ago or less. I'm not sure that we didn't just meet there, so I didn't know Ernie at all. And
Yeah,
I can't remember what the
I think
conference
you're
was
right,
about.
Larry, that we hadn't met. So
Yeah,
we were both shocked by all of this.
right. And I don't remember the conference very well. I don't remember the questions or what it was. But what it did do is it broadcast across the country that Ernie was enrolling at Michigan State and he was going to have a white roommate. And it only took a day and I got the first, probably a phone call out of many, probably somewhere in the 50 to 100 range of hate mails, of threats. And I found out a couple of years later that my family had also been receiving them, my father and
Wow.
mother.
Awful.
And, but I didn't know that at the time. And it lasted about 3 to 4 weeks. And then it tapered off and very, very few after that.
Yeah.
And I decided to basically ignore them because I didn't want to make an issue. Part of what what I wanted to do was make sure Ernie got a good start, and I didn't want to do anything that might have cops ushering us around campus.
Did you share that with Ernie? Ernie, were you aware
I,
that that was
I
going
did
on?
not. I didn't share it with anybody.
This is the first I've heard of this.
I totally kept it to myself.
Wow.
I didn't even I didn't tell my girlfriend, I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell anybody about it. I just decided to ignore it. And I think that was the right decision because it didn't ever come up. Nobody knew about it. And life went on.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I learned from you, Larry, was Ernie mentioned this earlier about how Herb Adderley lived in a dorm and he was a big help. Herb Adderley was from Philadelphia, Michigan State All-American. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame from his career with the Packers. And another football player that was real helpful to Ernie was Art Johnson from Flint. He played on those teams in the late 50s.
Yeah.
And I found this interesting, Larry. You said these guys really respected Ernie. They for who he was and what he had been through and coming to Michigan State. I guess Larry, talk about that aspect, and then Ernie, talk about how much you enjoyed getting to know those football players.
Well, I was aware of it because I was his roommate, and probably I would say once a week, maybe more. I would come back from class late in the day, and there would be a group of the black football players just hanging out in our room and having a good time. And the only one that I remember also was Herb Adderley, because obviously he's the one who became the most famous of that group. But usually there were 4 or 5, as I recall. And it was evident that Ernie was a hero to these people. And actually he was a hero to everybody, but especially I think the blacks on campus, who were very important for Michigan State, but no doubt in some ways still being discriminated against.
Yeah.
That Ernie was a real idol of theirs, somebody that they really, really respected.
Yeah.
And
Ernie, talk about
You
that.
know, one of the things about being 18, 17, 18, 19 is you're oblivious to a lot of things around you.
right.
And some of this I had no knowledge of, but I knew enough to know that when I walked around campus with Herb Adderley, I got a different response than when I was walking around. So, so I learned early that Art Johnson and Adderley and some other players were guys that everybody knew who they were, and that their relationship with you was helpful in helping you to get through, those early months of connection to class, to other students, to what was the future going to be. And as I said, one of the things that I learned from Larry Osterink was that you really had to open a book every now and then that you were there for something other than the games. And John Hannah may not have had his hands in everything, but my sense is that he was more of an orchestrator than we realized, and was really ahead of his time.
Yeah, yeah.
Administrator, and he obviously took the role of chairman of the Civil Rights Commission seriously, because he didn't want to be embarrassed. He didn't want to be outmaneuvered, and he didn't want to appear to be like George Wallace or Orville Faubus. He wanted to be seen as someone who was pointing towards the future and not living in the past.
Yeah. And it's important for me to point out here that these black players for Michigan State in the 50s under Biggie Munn and Duffy Daugherty were basically from the Midwest, Michigan factory towns. The Underground Railroad that Duffy Daugherty had in the 60s, with the players from the South coming up, they people don't understand this. Duffy gets accused of going down to the South to recruit black players just to win football games. It's totally wrong. What happened was the black high school coaches knew Michigan State's history from the 1954 and 56 Rose Bowls from lots of black stars, all Americans, on the Rose Bowl on TV. And I should add, if you're in the South, you were aware of Ernie Green's story, the first black recruit from the South, first Underground Railroad passenger, was Clifton Rofe from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. They knew Michigan State's reputation. And a Michigan State education professor was doing surveys on education in the South, and the principal and football coach at Merrill High School in Pine Bluff, the black school, asked Raymond Hatch to contact Duffy to take a look at Clifton Rofe. And Clifton Rofe went to Michigan State. He got hurt and never had a good football career. In fact, he never played it down. But he said he was indebted to Michigan State, the people of Michigan State. He became a dentist and went back home to Pine Bluff. He described himself as a country dentist. But that was the reputation Michigan State had in the South.
And you want to add that Cliff Rose's wife was the first black Supreme Court justice in the state of Arkansas.
That's right. He brought his Michigan State bride back to Pine Bluff, and their two daughters are both PhDs. And then their son, Willie Rofe, is in both the college and pro football Hall of Fame. I want to go back to desegregating the high schools in Little Rock, because the Washington Post has been close to about a year, I guess now, maybe 6 months, wrote a story about how North Little Rock, across the river from Central High School, had some black students. They tried to desegregate on their own outside of what the NAACP did. And they were also met at the school door by a white mob. And it's standing in the background is a picture of Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. And Jerry Jones, I asked you about this before, Ernie. Jerry Jones just kind of said, well, I was there curious. And that was the times, but he didn't really speak up about how people have to understand what was going on back then, and he's from that culture, and how much more he could do in the NFL to promote diversity. Can you talk about that, both Ernie and Herman?
Well, I think that Jerry Jones had enormous power, far beyond just his name on the masthead of the Dallas Cowboys, and that what was missing and is still missing today is that people like him who have extended leadership possibilities don't speak out. You just either go along with the existing norm, or you hide in the shadows. And my hope is that as we continue this discussion, that we show that it really is an opportunity for people to step up like John Hannah, that everybody doesn't have to be an Orval Faubus. We need some John Hannahs stepping forward at this point, exercising their leadership, and be willing to use their influence to spread the news that we don't have to have the old way, the Jim Crow segregated. And even if you're not segregated by law, you're segregated by practice. You have an opportunity to show people what real leadership can exist. And to me, that's where Jerry Jones is missing the point, that he should be expected to step forward, play a dominant role in leading the NFL, continuing to lead the NFL in the direction it's going, and make certain that you don't have a group of people coming behind you trying to eradicate all of that.
Well, yeah, I would say that the first thing is that the importance of learning history, because Tom, I had the opportunity to read that extensive article that the Washington Post wrote, and you're right, it was about 6 months ago, and I had no idea that Jerry Jones was in the area. And it comes down, and I think what Ernie is saying, it comes down to leadership, right? See something, say something. And it's easy, and we've all been at that fork in the road where it's easy to say nothing and just absorb into the moment. And at the same time, I think history will judge those who, did the harder right, so to speak, and see something, say something. So it'll be interesting. And I since that article came out, I thought it might have some impact within the NFL in terms of accountability. However, it kind of, news for a day, and then it kind of went away.
Yeah, and it's because it's Jerry Jones. And I make the point, I'm often writing about how the 1970 USC Alabama game is 99.9% myth. It had virtually no racial impact because college football integration was fait accompli by 1970 because of Michigan State, Duffy Daugherty, and the doors that Michigan State opened up for Black pioneers in the South in the 60s, like Jerry Levias at SMU, Warren McVeigh at Houston, Bob Grant at Wake Forest. All these things were happening in the mid 60s, long before USC showed up at Alabama. Yet that story gets portrayed as if Bear Bryant is a crusader. Meanwhile, Bear Bryant's first black player was 1970, Wilbur Jackson. Meanwhile, Auburn, in-state rival, recruited its first black player in 1969, James Owens, even though the myth is Bear Bryant couldn't recruit a black player because George Wallace wouldn't let him. Well, Auburn has since apologized. They say we should have done more to support James Owens. We should have recruited black players earlier. And when I say that, I mean like the former athletic director and their players who were basically supportive, but they say they should have been more aware. But at Alabama, they just say, well, Bear Bryant led the way. He was a crusader. And that's what happens when you don't tell the real story of history. And we're seeing this pattern repeated with the Arkansas governor, Sarah Huckabee, wanting to kind of erase or not properly report what happened with the Little Rock Nine in 1957 because it'll make kids, other Southern governors say this thing, or it'll make white kids feel uncomfortable. Your thoughts on what's going on with the Arkansas School Board, Ernie?
Well, the Arkansas School Board has decided to support the governor, who is Governor Huckabee. This is the second, I think it's the second woman who's governor of the state of Arkansas, if not the first. And that her position is that somehow history is being written, I gather, to support Black issues and not telling the truth. But that's just the opposite. It seems to me that if Arkansas is unwilling to really tell what happened in 56, 57, when we went to school, you know, as Larry indicated, the hate mail, I think I heard every way you could utilize the word nigger when I was a student at Central High School. But anybody who has the power and the ability to impact an institution like Jerry Jones and doesn't use it is really faulting who they are and what they can be and where we can go with this country and improve it immensely. And people like Jerry Jones are the switch that turns that on. And that my view is that we have to spend our time concentrating on people who have the ability to make change and are shirking that duty by not doing it.
Great. Herman, do you have any more avenues you want to go down here, or should we wrap it up?
Yeah. Well, I think real quickly, we've got a few minutes, and I think for our young listeners out there, it'd be great to hear from Ernie how he got his Wall Street career started and what advice he would have for others who would want to go into the Hollid process that is still somewhat, Ernie, the numbers are a little better than when you made your meteoric rise on Wall Street, but I'd be interested in hearing how that occurred. And you were running the Washington, D.C. office here and did a lot of great things.
Well, it occurred because when I looked around from my post as Assistant Secretary of Labor, I was a President Carter appointee, and one of the people who I think you ought to interview is the person who became Secretary of Labor, Ray Marshall, who grew up in Mississippi, who was a world-class economist, but he had a view that the industry had to do more, and certainly public finance, which depended upon so many people of color to have impact on the industry. I found that there were students who had the intellectual knowledge, but they didn't have the opportunity to apply it. And that one of the great things about going into the public finance business was that I was able to use my academic training, my connection with Wall Street, and my personal interest in seeing that we've got to have a redistribution of opportunity, not necessarily results, but opportunity, which is probably the first rung on climbing the ladder. And I think you are an example of this, that having finished a top tier business school is the ability to show that we are ready to compete. We don't want gifts necessarily. We just want to be able to get on the track and be able to show what our skills are.
Okay, what a great discussion. Let's wrap it up. First, let's go back to Larry. Larry, let's get some final comments from you. I was negligent not mentioning a little bit more about your own career. After Michigan State, you went to Stanford and earned postgraduate degrees and were on the cutting edge of laser research, if I have that correctly. Tell us a little bit about your career, Larry. You retired in my old stomping grounds of Del Mar, California, near San Diego. Tell us a little bit about what you went on to do after Michigan State, how you stayed connected to the school, and your final thoughts.
Well, I'll give you my final thought. The thing that jumps out at me, Ernie, is John Hannah would be so proud of what you've accomplished. You've given him everything he hoped for, and you're very impressive, and I just want to make that clear. In terms of my own career, I did get a doctorate at Stanford. I worked on, initially I did laser research and went into more of the application of lasers and started a few small companies and did that until 2000, when I retired from my technical career and joined my wife, Marcia, who Ernie may remember because she was my girlfriend at Michigan State. We have a company called Arts Attack, and we publish an art curriculum, stream it online for schools all around the country, and actually serve a lot of schools that are primarily Black. And I'm 83 years old and I'm still working. But I'm hoping to retire within the next year or two.
Yeah, that was great to have you, Larry. Ernie, your final thoughts.
Well, I was always been pleased that Dr. Hannah was so involved, and Larry and I have increased our relationship over the years. Had a chance to see each other and to appreciate what I think we both have achieved. My final thoughts are that this not be a final discussion. That one of the things that's important, seems to me, for the Michigan State crowd is that this impacts far beyond the football team. Really, it's a story that the alumni really need to know about and have some appreciation for. And I hope this is a line that will be continued, and we continue to learn from it.
Great. It was an honor having you, Ernie. And as usual, Herman, you bring us home. I'm so glad to have you as my co-host because you provide the perspective that I can't.
Well, we talked earlier about the importance of history, and I have a feeling that this entire series that Tom and I are putting together is going to be there in somewhere 20, 30, 40, maybe even 60 years from today. when we're looking at 120-year anniversary of the March on Washington, having the opportunity to come back and see icons, Ernie, what you did in terms of the bravery and your parents supporting you to make that decision as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, putting yourself in danger. Maybe you didn't understand all the danger, and sometimes we don't. Those of us who are leaders, we go and do what we do for the right reason. And Larry, for you, and just I call you Larry, unsung hero. I did not know you existed until Tom put this together, and of course, everybody knows who Ernie is, and you were there and played a very, very important role. And just on behalf of our nation, I want to thank you for what you've done. So, and Tom, it's so great to be able to do this. And I think, Ernie's advice that we should continue the discussion because we all learn from one another, and those perspectives are so important. And thanks for providing a platform for the conversation.
Okay, great. All right. This is episode 15. It'll be up on my website, tomshanahan.report. Please share it with as many people as you know. Read my website to learn more about the true story of college football integration, the true pioneers who led the way. And Michigan State played such a huge role in that. Thank you for watching.